Chapter 2. The Fate of the Pack. It was the mate of Old Gray, the leader, who was wounded on that October night near the banks of the Porcupine. The shot, the pain, the numbness in her leg had come so unexpectedly that in spite of her instinctive leaps into the shadows, she scarcely knew what had happened. But, in circling toward the river, she caught the breeze from a different angle, and with it the odor of man and of the things that denoted his camping place. The hair bristled along her whole spine, and the nameless terror that gripped her quickly subsided. She knew how to elude man. The night would hide her from him. The injured leg, however, was a bad hindrance, and she was well behind the other running wolves. The best she could do was to follow the general direction that they had taken, and on her 3 good legs try to reach the safety of the dense spruce forests bordering the river. The other wolves did not feel like crossing the swirling torrent. They had all drifted together again, following the mad scramble away from the camp, and now they were lying or squatting among the rocks along the bank, some licking scratched feet and legs, others just resting, all of them, however, with lolling tongues and quick breathing from the exertions of the chase. Old Gray alone seemed uneasy. Twice he stood up and walked from wolf to wolf, looking for the thin black one that was his constant companion and mate. His pack was a queer assortment of colors, running from yellowish gray to deep black. He himself was iron gray, with dark markings about the shoulders and head. These markings gave him a particularly fierce look, and made his great forequarters seem much heavier than the remainder of his body. Once more he walked around the resting band, 6 long-bodied, big-boned youngsters, the litter of the current year, and one older wolf, a black one, which had joined the pack for company and had been accepted when he showed no signs of wanting to dispute Old Gray's leadership. A grim-looking lot they were in the dim starlight of the moonless night. The rushing waters of the Porcupine gurgled so loudly that little else could be heard. Impatiently, the old gray wolf left its edge and trotted back on his trail a short distance. Here, the trees shut out all murmur of the river. A sudden harsh grunt showed the whereabouts of a moose. Then, a crash of dead branches told of heavy horns moving to the left. From far away in the lonesomeness of the mountains came the bawling of a cow moose. When all was still again, the wolf raised his nose toward the sky and howled. The sound was low-pitched, yet mellow. It began nowhere, then gained in volume until it seemed to fill the woods, then died down and drifted into nothingness on the air currents. So elusive was the call that no listening creature could be sure of its whereabouts, and all in the woods were listening. The 2 men, still crouching beside the campfire, looked at each other. Old Jim said nothing, but he knew now that it was a she-wolf his bullet had maimed, and that she was hit badly enough to be separated from the pack. Johnny glanced toward the guns. "That's the last you'll hear," remarked the old man. "That howler will wait some time before letting loose any more noise, and by that time the wounded one will find him. And if she were really badly crippled and couldn't travel after the others, you'd either hear from her or some more from the mate. Let's turn in and get some sleep." A few minutes later, the snores from old Jim's side of the tent drowned all nearby noise of the forest. The old man was right about the wolves. Old Gray's mate Blackie was not far from him, and answered the call with a whine. Instantly the old wolf's ears caught the exact direction and led him unerringly to her. When he came within view, however, he approached with utmost caution, and she regarded him with equal suspicion, even bared her teeth in a warning snarl. Each sensed that what had happened might somehow have altered their relationship. And so, Old Gray walked around Blackie, making sure there was no trap or no other harm for him. And Blackie, instinctively afraid because of her new helplessness and the possibility of his fury, crouched there on the defensive, waiting, but always keeping her sharp nose pointed toward him. At length, the big gray was convinced. He whined reassuringly and came forward. He singled out the bullet-torn leg and licked at the blood. His tongue was rough but thorough in cleaning out the wound. the saliva forming a kind of poultice with the slicked hair. Then he started back to the river with Blackie following slowly because of the increased stiffness of the injured muscles. The others of the pack watched their approach and then one by one came forward to sniff and examine for themselves. There was something almost furtive in the way that they slunk up, however, for Old Gray stayed nearby and warned them off by his grimness. He was in a bad temper over this. It was the first thing of the year that had gone against him. Presently, however, he dropped down full length on the grass and began to lick a sore front paw, one which years before had been caught in a steel trap and had never been quite right after he tore it loose. No ordinary trap could withstand the pull his mighty frame could give with its weight of over 160 pounds. A dim shadow moving along the water's edge made the wolves prick up their ears. Downstream walked a cow moose and a large calf. The wolves glanced toward their leader but did not stir. Presently the cow caught their scent and broke into a trot. The calf closely followed her. Behind them came a young bull with his first little horns. Seeing the cow start off in alarm, he plunged for the woods, almost knocking over the nearest wolf. With a vicious growl, the young wolf sprang at his hind leg, the other youngsters at once joining in the attack. Only Blackie and Old Gray remained in their places. The crash of the fight moved further and further into the woods. The little bull was as quick as a polo pony and easily defended himself by quick turns and sudden rushes. Presently, the wolves had enough and let him go his way. One was limping. On the way back, they came on the fresh trail of a doe. Hesitatingly, they sniffed it. There was none to lead them. Suddenly, the black outlaw forged ahead. He whimpered excitedly. The pups were thrilled with the idea of a chase. They joined in behind him. It was an hour before they lost the right track, and after wandering about, disgustedly slunk once more toward the river. But mischief had been started. For the first time, they had had the fun of hunting on their own, free from Old Gray's dominating lead. Days went by. Blackie's wound kept her from hunting. She limped about, but for the most part lay hidden in the spruce thickets. Old Gray remained with her almost constantly. He located moose and caribou carcasses left by hunters who had taken little more than the heads. On these, he and Blackie fed as unconcernedly as the lowly coyotes. The pups were too full of nervous energy to wait around, and so made longer and more distant forays with the black outlaw to guide them. After a week, they deserted their parents entirely. They stayed in the valley of the Porcupine, but usually in its lower reaches where there was little hard climbing to be done. Here they ran riot at times. Soon one was caught in a trap set for a wolverine. Unlike Old Gray, he could not pull loose. The trapper, encouraged by this success, put out poison baits and killed 2 more. Still, the band of 4 continued merrily. When the snow became over a foot deep, the trapper, armed with his rifle, took up the pack's trail. He surprised them by lying down in a thicket, sleeping off the effect of a feast on deer captured during the night before. Picking out the blackest to shoot at, he managed to kill the outlaw and the largest of the pups. The other 2 dashed away in a panic and did not stop running until they had come back to the shadowed valley near Great Pass. The following night, they slunk about fearfully, not knowing what to do. It was here that they had been safe for their parents, but these were not to be found. For 2 nights they fed on hunters' carcasses or what remained of them after the inroads of bears and coyotes. The bears were hibernating now, but the coyotes were very active, seeing that the newcomers were pups. The 2 coyotes had offered a fight over the carcass of a deer. So little confidence remained in the lonely pair that at first they were completely browbeaten. Then hunger got the better of their fears, and they growled back and showed such an array of teeth that the smaller wolves backed away. Had any trapper been in the section, the pups would have been easy game for him. The bears were hibernating now, but the coyotes were very active. Seeing that the newcomers were pups, 2 coyotes had offered a fight over the carcass of a deer. So little confidence remained in the lonely pair that at first they were completely browbeaten. Then hunger got the better of their fears, and they growled back and showed such an array of teeth that the smaller wolves backed away. Had any trapper been in the section, the pups would have been easy game for him. In the deep snows of January, they again drifted down the valley, mostly on the ice over the Porcupine. The trapper was still at work there. He set 6 wire snares. In the morning, he found the female pup in one, and signs that the male had been caught in another. Somehow he had freed himself and rushed away toward the north. He had learned his lesson. 2 days later, the male pup came to the trails of many wolves. Before this, he had shunned strangers of his kind, fearful of what they might do to him. But now, in his wretched loneliness, he followed. He came upon the pack when they were resting after a big kill and a mighty feast. Lazily they regarded him. Their big leader, dark gray in color like himself, rose and stalked toward him. The pup stood his ground, but cringed and whined ingratiatingly. The leader looked him over, then walked disdainfully away and lay down. The others of the food-stuffed lolling band at once lost interest. The pup crouched down at one side, an accepted member of the fierce group, part of which he was to lead in the year, when the Wolf King, his black brother from a later litter, came to rule the Porcupine.